because he's not very intelligent and undoubtedly remains damaged by the early death of his mother, Diana. And he very foolishly blames the media for her, in his words, murdered her, which is complete nonsense.
Harry hasn't got the intellect, he hasn't got the legal advice, he hasn't got the ability. And there was an agent who told, two agents who told horrible stories about her bullying and her oppression.
7. That's the number of serious controversies, documented claims, and institutional scrutinies that royal biographer Tom Bower, the man they call the most feared investigative journalist in Britain, has laid at Meghan Markle's door. And here's what makes this story different from every other royal drama you've seen trending online. This isn't gossip. This isn't a tabloid hit job. This is sourced, documented, forensically assembled by a journalist who spent decades investigating prime ministers, billionaires, and media moguls before he ever turned his lens toward the Duchess of Sussex. Tom Bower's best-selling biography, Revenge. Meghan, Harry, and the war between the Windsors didn't just make headlines. It detonated a bomb in the middle of the royal narrative that Meghan and Harry had spent years carefully constructing. And some of the most explosive claims in that book, plus what has emerged since, point to controversies that Bower says go far deeper than bad press. But here's the question you need to sit with before we go further. If even half of what Tom Bower has documented is accurate, what does that tell us about everything Meghan has said publicly? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to make up your own mind. Who is Tom Bower? Why does his word carry weight? Before we get into the 7 controversies, we need to talk about who Tom Bower actually is, because that context matters enormously. Tom Bower is not a royal gossip columnist. He is not a social media commentator with an axe to grind. He is a barrister-trained investigative journalist with over 4 decades of experience exposing the powerful. His previous subjects include Sir Robert Maxwell, Richard Branson, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and Rupert Murdoch. These are people with armies of lawyers, people who fight back, and they have, multiple times. Bower has faced legal threats throughout his career. He's been called into rooms by the most powerful solicitors in Britain. And yet, case after case, his investigations have held up. That track record is what makes Revenge so significant, because Bower didn't write it on impulse. According to interviews he gave during the book's promotional tour in 2022, he interviewed over 150 people for the project: palace insiders, former friends of Meghan, production staff, charity workers, and royal aides. He documented everything, cross-referenced sources, and the result was a 464-page account that Meghan's legal team did not sue over. Let that sink in. In a world where Meghan Markle's legal team has been extremely active, winning cases against the Mail on Sunday, threatening broadcasters, and sending cease and desist letters with apparent regularity, they did not take Tom Bower to court over Revenge. Why? That's a question worth asking. Now let's get into what he found. Controversy number 1. The bullying allegations and the palace investigation. The first and perhaps most structurally important controversy is one that Bower covers extensively and one that has its own institutional paper trail. In March 2021, just days before the bombshell Oprah interview aired, the Times of London published a story that stopped many people cold. It reported that in October 2018, Samantha Mulroney, Meghan's former personal assistant, had raised a formal complaint with the palace's Human Resources Department. The allegation that Meghan had driven 2 personal assistants out of the household and had undermined the confidence of a 3rd member of staff. These were not anonymous grumblings. These were documented HR complaints made through official palace channels. Buckingham Palace announced it was launching a formal review. They hired an outside law firm, independent investigators, to examine the claims. The process was serious enough that multiple former staff members were contacted and interviewed. Now here's where the story gets tense. Tom Bower, in Revenge, goes significantly deeper than the Times report. He claims the pattern of behavior described by staff was not isolated. He writes about multiple household staff members describing a working environment they found distressing. He names a culture of high demands, unpredictable emotional responses, and treatment that several people described as demeaning. And then, the review. After Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022, Buckingham Palace quietly announced that the findings of the bullying review would not be published. The results were shared privately with those involved, the palace said, and would remain confidential. Think about that for a moment. An independent investigation was commissioned, lawyers were hired, staff were interviewed, and then the results were buried. Here's what I want you to consider. If the investigation had found nothing, if it had completely exonerated Meghan, would the palace have had any reason not to publish that result? In a moment when the institution was under enormous pressure from the Oprah fallout, a clean bill of health would have been a powerful public relations tool. So why bury it? Bower's conclusion, which he has stated publicly, is that the findings were damaging enough to the Sussexes that publishing them would have made an already combustible situation far worse. Meghan's spokesperson denied the bullying allegations at the time, calling them a calculated smear campaign. But the investigation happened. The results were concealed, and the staff members who made the original complaints have not, to this day, retracted their accounts. Controversy number 2. The visa question that won't go away. Now, we move into territory that is genuinely sensitive, genuinely unresolved, and genuinely significant, because it touches on official government processes on both sides of the Atlantic. When Prince Harry arrived in the United States and received his green card, he filled out standard immigration forms. These forms, used by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, ask applicants to disclose any past drug use. This is a direct mandatory question on federal immigration documents. Harry, of course, had publicly admitted to using cannabis, cocaine, and magic mushrooms extensively and openly in his memoir Spare, published in January 2023. He described these experiences in considerable detail. The Heritage Foundation, a Washington-based conservative think tank, filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, asking for Harry's immigration and visa records. They specifically wanted to know whether Harry's drug admissions had been considered during his green card application. The Biden administration's DHS refused to release the documents, citing privacy protections. The Heritage Foundation sued in federal court. Now, where does Meghan fit into this? This is where Bower's broader argument connects. Bower's thesis throughout Revenge is that Meghan and Harry operated within a carefully managed public image architecture, and that their move to America was not the spontaneous freedom-seeking narrative they presented, but a strategically planned relocation. That planning, Bower argues, involved decisions and omissions that do not withstand close scrutiny. The immigration question is significant because it is not merely tabloid speculation. It is a live legal dispute involving federal agencies, filed by a credible institution, and adjudicated in U.S. federal court. Whether or not it produces findings adverse to Harry, and as of now there has been no ruling, the fact that a federal court is actively hearing arguments about whether his immigration records were handled properly is not nothing. And here's the follow-up question. Nobody is really asking loudly enough. Meghan, as the American citizen sponsoring her husband's immigration process, would have been involved in and aware of the paperwork involved. If questions about the completeness or accuracy of those documents were ever to surface, what would her exposure be? That is not a rhetorical question designed to smear anyone. That is the logical downstream consequence of an active federal court case about those records. Bower has been careful about this. He raises questions rather than stating conclusions. But the questions are serious, and the legal machinery around them is real. Controversy number 3. The Archewell Foundation, charity financials under the microscope. This is where things get particularly uncomfortable, because it involves money given by ordinary people to a charitable organization. Meghan and Harry established the Archewell Foundation as their flagship nonprofit after leaving royal duties. Tax filings are public record in the United States, and what those filings show has attracted significant criticism. According to the Foundation's publicly available Form 990 filings, in its first full operating year, Archewell raised approximately $13 million. Of that, a fraction went directly to charitable grants. In 2021, the Foundation reported spending more on salaries and administrative costs than it distributed in charitable grants. Now, to be fair, it is not unusual for a new nonprofit to have high administrative costs in its early years. Infrastructure takes time to build. Legal, operational, and staffing costs are real. Charity watchdog groups make allowances for this. But Tom Bower, in Revenge and in subsequent interviews, raises a more pointed concern. He argues that the Archewell Foundation functions less as a genuine charitable vehicle and more as a brand-building platform for the Sussexes' commercial endeavors. Their Netflix deal, their Spotify deal, since ended, their book deals, and their speaking engagements. He points to the overlap between Archewell Foundation activities and the commercial Archewell Productions entity. He raises questions about whether donors giving money to a charitable cause were in fact subsidizing a celebrity brand operation. This is an extremely serious allegation. If a charity's resources are being used, even indirectly, to benefit a for-profit commercial operation with which it shares leadership, branding, and staff, that raises questions for the IRS and for state charity regulators. And here's the key point. In the United States, the IRS takes self-dealing by charity directors extraordinarily seriously. There are strict prohibitions on private benefit, meaning the directors or founders of a charity cannot use its resources for personal or commercial gain. Let me ask you directly, when was the last time you heard Meghan or Harry give a detailed public accounting of exactly how Archewell Foundation money has been spent, and exactly where the line between the charitable and commercial Archewell entities is drawn? Because I've been looking, and detailed, specific, transparent answers to those questions are hard to find. The Foundation's most recent 990 filings show improvement, more money going to grants. But the early years numbers, combined with Bower's specific allegations about the intermingling of charitable and commercial activity, mean this story is not over. Controversy number 4. The Spotify deal, the podcast, and the question of delivery. This one is particularly revealing, not because it involves legal jeopardy, but because it reveals something about how Meghan and Harry operate commercially and raises questions about representations made to business partners. In late 2020, Archewell Audio signed a deal with Spotify reportedly worth between $15 million and $25 million. The deal was announced with fanfare. A teaser holiday episode was released, and then, almost nothing, for nearly 2 years. In December 2022, Meghan finally launched Archetypes, a podcast in which she interviewed celebrity friends including Mariah Carey, Mindy Kaling, and Serena Williams. The show ran for one season of 12 episodes. Then, in June 2023, Spotify and Archewell parted ways. Here is where it gets interesting. Bill Simmons, a prominent Spotify executive and podcaster, did not hold back when the deal ended. He publicly called Harry and Meghan effing grifters. He was not fired for saying it. Spotify did not distance themselves from his comment. Now, what does a $20 million content deal for a podcast that ran one season and was then canceled tell us? Tom Bower's argument, one he made before the deal even collapsed, is that the Sussexes were selling a product they couldn't deliver. He claims their pitch to Spotify, to Netflix, and to publishers was based on a level of access, influence, and content generation capacity that was always more aspirational than real. The Netflix deal, also announced in 2020 and reportedly worth up to $100 million, has produced a docuseries, Harry and Meghan, released December 2022, and a cooking/lifestyle show, With Love Meghan, released January 2025. For a deal of that magnitude, spread over multiple years, the output has been remarkably modest. Here's the question that should be bothering every business journalist. When you pitch a content partnership to a public company, Spotify is publicly traded, and that pitch involves representations about what you will produce. What happens when the deliverables fall significantly short? That is not necessarily a criminal matter, but it is a corporate governance matter for Spotify's shareholders. And it speaks directly to Bauer's central thesis, that Meghan in particular is extraordinarily skilled at selling a vision of herself that the underlying reality does not support. Controversy number 5. The written complaint against a British broadcaster and the Ofcom question. This controversy is less about money and more about power. Specifically, how Meghan and Harry have used legal and regulatory mechanisms to shape media coverage of themselves. In 2021, Harry made a formal complaint to Ofcom, the British broadcast regulator, about coverage on GB News. In 2023, Harry and Meghan's team were reported to have complained to ITV about Piers Morgan, whose documentary about Meghan aired to significant viewership. More significantly, Harry launched legal action against multiple British tabloids and their parent companies. He settled with News Group newspapers, publishers of The Sun and the now-defunct News of the World, in January 2024, with NGN issuing a public apology and paying substantial damages related to phone hacking. This is legitimate. Phone hacking is a crime. Harry was a victim of it. His legal action on that front was justified and successful. But Tom Bauer draws a distinction between legitimate legal redress for genuine crimes and what he characterizes as a broader campaign to suppress and intimidate critical coverage. He argues that the legal infrastructure around the Sussexes, their team of lawyers, their PR operation, their ability to file complaints with regulators, has been deployed not merely to correct falsehoods, but to create a chilling effect on any journalism that asks difficult questions. Bauer himself has been on the receiving end of this. During and after the publication of Revenge, legal pressure was applied. He has spoken publicly about this. The significance here is institutional. When private individuals, even very wealthy and famous ones, can use legal pressure to make journalists, broadcasters, and publishers think twice before publishing critical but accurate information, that is a press freedom concern. And Bauer argues that what Meghan and Harry have built around themselves is precisely this kind of suppression architecture. Ask yourself, how many investigative pieces about the actual finances, actual charitable activities, and actual business dealings of the Sussexes have you seen from major British or American outlets? And is that absence explained by there being nothing to investigate? Or by something else? Controversy number 6. Misrepresentations in Netflix and the memoir, and what that means legally. This is the controversy that has perhaps the most significant long-tail legal implications, and it connects directly to the question of why some legal analysts have raised eyebrows at certain claims made in Netflix's Harry and Meghan docuseries, and in Harry's memoir Spare. In the Netflix series, a photograph was shown that was presented as paparazzi harassment of Meghan in the early days of her relationship with Harry. The photograph turned out to have been taken at a completely different event, unrelated to the Sussexes. Netflix quietly removed it after the error was identified. In the same series, footage described as showing the hostile media atmosphere around the Sussexes was actually footage from a completely different celebrity entirely. Again, Netflix corrected it. Now, here's why this matters beyond simple sloppiness. The Netflix deal is a commercial contract. The Sussexes are not just interview subjects in that documentary. They are executive producers. As executive producers, they bear creative and editorial responsibility for what is presented as factual. Presenting fabricated or misattributed imagery as evidence of their lived experience is not merely a factual error. In a commercial context, in a documentary sold globally as a factual account, it raises questions about the integrity of the entire narrative. Tom Bauer goes further. He contends that several of the most emotionally powerful claims in both the Netflix series and in Spare, including claims about the treatment of Meghan by the royal family, are either unverifiable or directly contradicted by witnesses who were present. For example, the claim that a family member asked about the potential skin color of Archie before his birth. one of the most incendiary revelations from the Oprah interview, was never confirmed by an independent witness. The family member was never publicly named, and multiple individuals close to the royal family disputed the characterization of the conversation. Bauer does not say this didn't happen. He says it cannot be verified, and that the narrative architecture around it was constructed to be unverifiable. Here is the legal significance that nobody is talking about loudly enough. If publishers and streaming platforms produce and distribute content presented as factual, and that content contains material misrepresentations about named individuals, the royal family members are real people. Those individuals have potential grounds for legal action. Several British royals have historically been reluctant to sue, but that reluctance is not infinite. And as Bauer notes, the accumulation of unverified claims in paid-for commercial products eventually reaches a threshold. Controversy number 7. The question of security, taxpayer money, and official misrepresentation. This is the final, and in some ways the most structurally serious controversy, because it involves the use of public resources and the possibility that official representations were made that were inaccurate. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in January 2020, a moment the press quickly dubbed Megxit, there was extensive negotiation about what their future security arrangements would look like. Harry was and remains a potential target for hostile actors given his military service and royal status. Security is a genuine and legitimate concern. The controversy has several layers. Layer 1. Harry and Meghan initially indicated they intended to be financially independent. They said they would cover their own costs. Yet the couple continued to use and request Metropolitan Police security resources during visits to the UK for a period after their departure. There were disputes about who was paying for this and on what basis it was authorized. Layer 2. When Harry and Meghan moved to the United States, they received, via a decision that has never been fully publicly explained, briefings and cooperation from U.S. security agencies that would not normally be available to private citizens. This has been reported by multiple outlets and has never been formally denied. Layer 3, and this is the one Bauer focuses on most acutely. The couple's legal team made representations during the Megxit negotiations about their intentions, their plans, and the arrangements they were seeking that subsequent events suggest were not fully accurate. Specifically, Bauer claims that the couple was already in advanced negotiations with Netflix and other commercial entities before those negotiations were disclosed to the palace, which would mean that the commercial strategy was concealed during official negotiations about their departure terms. If that is accurate, it is not a small matter. The terms of the Megxit agreement, what titles they kept, what security they received, what financial arrangements were made, were all negotiated on the basis of representations made by the Sussexes team. If those representations omitted or mischaracterized material facts, the legal and institutional implications are significant. Tom Bauer was specific about this in interviews accompanying the book's release. He said, based on his sources inside the palace negotiations, that key information was withheld. And here's the sharpest question of this entire video. If you were a senior palace official who had negotiated in good faith and then discovered that the other party had concealed the full extent of their commercial plans, what would you do? And why do you think the palace has remained largely silent about the specifics of those negotiations ever since? Silence is not always innocence. Sometimes it is strategy. Tom Bauer's central thesis, pulling it all together. So we've walked through 7 documented controversies. Let's step back and look at what Tom Bauer actually argues is the through line connecting all of them. Bauer's thesis is not that Meghan Markle is a uniquely villainous person. His thesis is more specific and in some ways more damning. That Meghan is an extraordinarily skilled self-promoter who has spent her adult life constructing and maintaining a public persona, and that when the facts don't fit the persona, the facts get managed. He argues that the bullying allegations fit this pattern. because they describe a private behavior dramatically at odds with the public image of compassion and vulnerability. He argues that the charity financials fit this pattern because they reveal an organization that talks about giving but prioritizes brand. He argues that the Spotify and Netflix situations fit this pattern because they reveal a tendency to promise more than can be delivered and to move on when accountability arrives. He argues that the legal suppression campaign fits this pattern because it is the infrastructure of someone who knows their public narrative cannot survive genuine scrutiny. And he argues that the Megxit misrepresentations fit this pattern because the entire departure was a strategic maneuver disguised as a principled stand. The consistent thread, Bauer says, is the gap between the story Meghan tells and the story the documents tell. Where does Harry fit into all of this? This is perhaps the most poignant part of Bauer's account. He suggests, carefully but unmistakably, that Harry was not a co-architect of many of these situations. He was a participant, a willing one in some cases, a bewildered one in others. Several of Bauer's sources describe Harry as someone who genuinely believed the narrative he was living, who had been, in Bauer's telling, profoundly shaped by grief, by institutional trauma, and by a relationship that gave him purpose and direction in a way nothing previously had. That made him, Bauer argues, uniquely vulnerable to being led somewhere he might not have chosen to go with clear eyes. Whether that characterization is fair to Harry is something you'll have to decide, but it does raise a question worth sitting with. If Harry truly had no idea about some of what was happening around him, what does that say about the marriage he's described as his salvation? The bigger picture. Why this matters beyond celebrity gossip. I want to be direct with you about something before we close. Some people will watch a video like this and say, "Who cares? This is celebrity drama. Real people are struggling with real problems." I hear that, and I don't dismiss it. But here's why I think this story is actually worth your serious attention. Beyond the soap opera. It's about institutions. The monarchy, for all its faults, is an institution that has functioned as a stabilizing constant in British public life for over 1,000 years. The assault on it, if Bauer's account is accurate, was not principled dissent. It was strategic demolition for commercial gain, dressed up in the language of racial justice and mental health advocacy. It's about charity. Real people gave real money to Archewell Foundation believing it would help real causes. If that money was used to build a brand rather than fund programs, those donors were deceived. It's about truth. In an era of competing narratives and manufactured reality, the question of who is telling the truth and who has built an entire architecture to prevent the truth from emerging matters. And it's about accountability. The powerful, and make no mistake, a woman with a Netflix deal, a book deal, a foundation, a legal team, and a global platform is powerful, should be held to the same standard of scrutiny as anyone else. Tom Bauer has spent his career applying that scrutiny to the powerful. He did it with Maxwell. He did it with Blair. He did it with Murdoch. And now he's done it with Meghan. The question is whether the rest of the media and the public are willing to look honestly at what he found. So let me leave you with 3 questions to carry out of this video. First, given everything we've covered today, the bullying investigation, the charity finances, the Spotify collapse, the immigration records case, the misrepresented footage, the Megxit negotiations, and the legal suppression campaign, do you think Meghan Markle has been treated unfairly by the media? Or do you think the media has actually undercovered the documented concerns about her? Second, Tom Bauer has put his reputation, and it is a formidable one, behind these claims. More than 150 sources, a 464-page book, no lawsuit from Meghan's legal team. Does that change how seriously you take what he's saying? And third, what would it take for you to change your mind? Whatever position you came into this video holding, what evidence would shift it? Because that question, the willingness to let evidence change our conclusions, is ultimately what separates serious inquiry from tribal loyalty. I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments. Not to fight, but to actually think this through together. If this video made you think, share it. Not to score points, but because these questions deserve a wider audience. And subscribe if you want more coverage like this. Rigorous, sourced, and willing to go where the evidence leads, regardless of who it makes uncomfortable. See you in the next one.